to talk to you a little bit about accommodations commonly used, in particular with individuals with brain injuries. There are some very typical ones, very easy to understand ones, and often very easy to implement. Things like flexible scheduling, giving additional learning time, giving someone a self-paced workload. Sometimes breaks can be taken into account, longer breaks, shorter breaks, more frequent breaks. We can provide backup coverage for breaks in situations. Time off for appointments is another common one. Job sharing, part-time scheduling, things like that, just to make a more flexible arrangement for the individual. Also, the use of job coaches is very, very common, particularly in the learning phase of a job. When you're learning a job, sometimes, as I've said before, it can be difficult to pick up new tasks, difficult to remember things. So it's quite common and quite a good practice to use a job coach, somebody to bounce ideas off and help you learn the job. And there are job coaches available in the community with a lot of the employment services out there. Some of the things environmentally that you can think about are reduced distractions in the workplace. Sometimes people use white noise machines. Sometimes people who are working in a job have been known to use noise-canceling headphones, or listen to music if they're doing a task that doesn't involve listening to directions from someone. Increasing the natural light in an office can be very helpful. Reducing clutter in a work environment, dividing larger tasks into smaller steps, restructuring a job to allow for only the essential duties. Things like that can be very helpful. Another common practice, which is similar to using a job coach, is assigning a mentor or perhaps one particular colleague to oversee the work of the individual who's employed, because one point of reference can be very helpful to the individual who's trying to learn the job. Also, memory cues for people that have challenges with memory are good. Things like using a calendar, using a reminder, writing down cheat sheets, pictograms, pasting directions close to where equipment is, things like that can be very helpful. So writing to-do lists, posting instructions, labeling things commonly used on your job, things like smartphones, watches can be used effectively to remind timing of things, or even to write down a list of tasks. You can even use a smartphone to take a photograph of, for example, a finished product or steps that are used in achieving a goal at work, and that's sometimes very helpful. And very important as well is having a regular check-in with a supervisor or coworker, just to make sure things are on track. Now, hopefully the employer will provide positive feedback and give regular breaks, keep the channels of communication open, but to a certain degree that's the responsibility of you, the individual who's going to be on the job. You want to make sure that you keep the lines of communication open and that you are expressing the things you need in a reasonable manner. I can give you an example of a case where someone asked too many questions and it wasn't appropriate and didn't please the employer. They were continually asking if they were getting the same tasks right in a shelf stocking job, and unfortunately the result was they weren't getting the shelf stocked because they were asking continually if they were getting it right. So there's a little bit of discretion that should be used in situations like this, and that's why often it's a good idea to have one person assigned to assist the individual who's learning the job. And then you work out a schedule of when it's appropriate to ask questions and when it's not. And occupational therapists can be extremely helpful in cases like this. They tend to know about the ergonomics of a job, the best learning outcomes in a job, and the BC Centre for Ability hires many occupational therapists who are very good at this type of work. Now, some of the things that can work well, that I've seen work very well in creating a positive learning environment at work, screening out as many distractions as possible. So if there's too much stimulation going on, it's sometimes very difficult for someone with a brain injury to pick up the details of the job. So it's getting down to the essential duties of the job and getting the distractions out of the way. As I said before, identifying one supervisor or colleague who can be a mentor to the individual can be very helpful. And this can be arranged with an employer most often. Creating lists or pictograms of tasks, very helpful. Using a smartphone, as I mentioned before, for reminders. And sometimes it's great, if possible, to have someone model the job tasks for you. So somebody can actually, it could be a job coach, could be another person on the job, could show you how to do the job, and then you, the individual who's employed, can demonstrate that you've learned from that and you can do the job. And it can be done on a number of times, and as long as there's an expectation of success and that you're trying, this should work very well. Some other things that have worked, sometimes repeating instructions back to a supervisor or a mentor, somebody you're working closely with, can be very helpful. Checking your work before you hand it in cases of independent work where you need to show a supervisor or somebody that you've done it. Check it before you hand it in. It's very important. Using work trials or situational assessments to determine job fit can be a good way to figure out if this is a good job for you. And as I've said a few times, job coaches can be very effective in this process. What are you likely to expect when you start the job? Because keeping a job is very important, and there are steps involved here as well. Well, first off, I tell you all to expect to feel nervous, because everyone does. You can expect to make a few mistakes and learn from them, and expect to be told that you were wrong sometimes. But you can also expect to feel good when you do it right, and expect that you will get praise for doing things right. Above all, I tell you all to expect to succeed and believe in yourself. If you have questions, write them down and ask at an appropriate time. And make sure that if you're working on a job and you don't understand something, you ask about it, right? Faking it or pretending that you know doesn't usually work. But as I said earlier in the conversation, one of the most important things in any employment situation is building relationships with your coworkers, with your supervisors, learning how to act socially on the job. So remember that most discussions in the job should focus on the work at hand. It's okay to be friendly and social with your coworkers, but it's not okay to be distracting and talking about too many things outside of work during a workday. So the more you focus on the job and doing it right, the more success you'll have. I'd like to talk to you about a few famous people who are successfully employed and are people who have acquired brain injuries. Jason Priestley, who you may know as Brandon in Beverly Hills 90210, if you're that old and you watched that show. He has a hobby of driving race cars, and he was involved in a very serious accident in 2002 in which he sustained a brain injury. Now, he has managed to successfully direct and produce TV series and films since that time, and he is still, I think he recently wrote a memoir of his days back as an actor, and he's still very successful. What he has said is that he had to relearn how to memorize lines, and it did take him a while to adjust to new realities as a person with a brain injury, but he was able to succeed. Another famous actor that you probably heard of, George Clooney, while he was filming Syriana, he sustained a brain injury after falling off a chair, of all things, and he spent a year not knowing what had happened to him, with quite serious memory loss and blinding headaches. And in the end, a neurologist discovered that he had damaged his spine, and in fact, the spinal fluid was not flowing properly to his brain. And so he underwent surgery and now is doing much better. But he still has challenges with memory loss and challenges learning lines in particular. And you've all heard of the concussions that happen in sport. Sidney Crosby is a very obvious one. Ben Roethlisberger, the quarterback on Pittsburgh Steelers. These are people who have sustained serious brain injuries but are maintaining their careers through therapy and some tricks they've learned to work their way through it. So I want you to remember that many people with brain injuries are successfully employed. As long as you focus on your own success, good things will happen in employment. Thank you very much for your time.